Welcome to Stories That Matter. They seated me with the catering staff at my own brother's wedding, not at the family table, not even at a random guest table in the back, literally at the folding card table where the servers were supposed to eat their dinner during their break. But when the venue owner walked over and called me mom in front of 200 guests, everything my family thought they knew about me crumbled in one devastating moment. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The invitation arrived on cream-colored cardstock, elegant script announcing the union of Marcus Blackwell and Sophia Chen at the prestigious Riverside Manor in Millbrook Heights. My name was printed clearly, Ms. Elena Blackwell. Not Elena and Guest, just me, alone. Which should have been my first warning sign, but I was too excited about my little brother's big day to notice the subtle snub. I'd spent 3 months planning for this wedding, 3 months saving every penny from my job at the downtown flower shop to buy the perfect dress, a navy blue midi that made me feel beautiful for the first time in years, 3 months coordinating with the florist to ensure Marcus got the exact white roses and baby's breath arrangements he'd dreamed of since he was 12 and used to plan imaginary weddings for his action figures, 3 months believing that family meant something more than blood and shared childhood memories. Marcus had always been the golden child, the one who went to Stanford on a full scholarship while I worked 2 jobs to put myself through community college, the one who landed a 6-figure tech job in Silicon Valley while I arranged flowers for other people's special moments, the one who found love with Sophia, a brilliant pediatric surgeon, while I spent my Friday nights watching Netflix with my cat Meredith. I wasn't bitter about it, honestly. I was proud of him. I just thought that pride was mutual. The morning of the wedding, I drove the 2 hours from my apartment in Cedar Falls to Millbrook Heights, my carefully pressed dress hanging in the back seat, my gift, a hand-painted wooden recipe box filled with our grandmother's handwritten cards, wrapped in silver paper on the passenger seat. I'd spent weeks recreating Grandma Rose's faded recipes in my own careful handwriting because I knew how much Marcus missed her Sunday dinners. Riverside Manor was everything the website promised and more. Sprawling gardens, a stone chapel that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale, and a reception hall with crystal chandeliers that caught the afternoon light like captured stars. I felt underdressed the moment I stepped out of my 10-year-old Honda Civic, watching as guests emerged from BMWs and Tesla sedans in designer gowns that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The ceremony was beautiful. Marcus looked handsome in his charcoal gray tuxedo, tears streaming down his face as Sophia walked down the aisle in a dress that belonged in a museum. I sat in the 3rd row, not the 2nd where immediate family traditionally sits, but close enough to catch Marcus's eye when he turned to look at the guests. He smiled at me, and for a moment, everything felt normal. Like we were still the same kids who used to build blanket forts and share secrets under the old oak tree in our backyard. After the ceremony, guests mingled in the garden while the wedding party took photos. I wandered alone among the rose bushes, admiring the landscaping and trying not to feel conspicuous as groups of Sophia's medical colleagues and Marcus's tech friends chatted in circles that somehow never seemed to have room for one more person. I recognized a few faces from family gatherings over the years, our cousin David, our Aunt Patricia, some family friends, but they were all deep in conversation with people I didn't know. People who belonged in this world of expensive wine and investment portfolios. When the dinner bell chimed, I followed the crowd into the reception hall. The seating chart was displayed on an elegant easel near the entrance, table assignments written in the same flowing script as the invitations. I scanned the list for my name, starting with Table 1, where our parents sat with the wedding party, then Table 2, with the grandparents and close family friends. Tables 3, 4, and 5 held various relatives and college friends. I kept reading, my stomach dropping a little more with each table that didn't include my name. Table 12, the very last table on the list, Elena Blackwell. I made my way across the reception hall, weaving between tables adorned with those perfect white roses I'd helped coordinate, until I reached the far corner near the kitchen doors. Table 12 was smaller than the others. A simple round table with basic chairs instead of the elegant Chiavari chairs that graced every other table. The centerpiece was a small potted plant instead of the elaborate floral arrangements everywhere else.
3 people were already seated. Maria, who I recognized as one of the servers from earlier, James, a young man wearing the black vest and bow tie of the catering staff, and Patricia, an older woman who introduced herself as the day of coordinator. They looked as confused as I felt. "I think there might be a mistake," I said, showing them my place card. "I'm Elena, Marcus's sister." Maria's eyes widened. "Oh, honey, we thought you were one of the vendor meals. The card table is usually for staff who need to eat during the reception." The realization hit like a physical blow. My own family had seated me with the hired help. Not because there wasn't room at the family tables. I could see empty chairs at tables 3 and 4. Not because of some innocent mistake with the seating chart. This was deliberate. This was a message. I stood there for a moment, place card trembling in my hand, watching my brother laugh with his groomsmen at the head table while our parents raised champagne flutes in a toast I couldn't hear from my corner by the kitchen. The weight of the slight settled into my chest like a stone, heavy and cold and undeniable. This was where they thought I belonged, with the people they paid to serve them. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I sat down at table 12, trying to process what had just happened while maintaining some semblance of dignity. Maria, the server, immediately scooted her chair closer to mine. "Honey, you don't have to sit here," she whispered, her kind eyes filled with concern. "I can talk to the coordinator about finding you a proper seat with your family." "No, it's fine," I lied, smoothing my navy dress and placing my small clutch on the table. "Really, I'm sure there's just been some mix-up." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The place cards were handwritten in calligraphy. Someone had deliberately written Elena Blackwell and placed it at the staff table. Someone had looked at the seating chart and decided this was exactly where I belonged. James, the young server, was frantically texting someone on his phone. "This is so messed up," he muttered. "I've worked 100 weddings and I've never seen families seated with catering staff. Like literally never." Patricia, the coordinator, kept glancing nervously toward the head table where my parents sat with Marcus and Sophia. "Maybe we should just quietly move you to table 8, she suggested. "There are 2 empty seats there and I don't think anyone would notice." "Please don't," I said quickly. The last thing I wanted was to cause a scene at Marcus's wedding. "I'm fine here. You all seem lovely." And they were. Maria told me about her daughter who was starting nursing school in the fall. James was saving money for culinary school while working weddings on weekends. Patricia had been coordinating events for 15 years and treated every wedding like it was her own daughter's big day. They were warm, genuine people who welcomed me into their conversation without hesitation. Meanwhile, across the reception hall, I watched my family. Our parents, Robert and Linda Blackwell, were holding court at table 1, our father regaling the head table with what looked like embarrassing childhood stories about Marcus, based on the laughter and my brother's red face. Our mother kept dabbing at her eyes with her handkerchief, overwhelmed with emotion at seeing her baby boy married. At table 3, I spotted our cousin David with his wife Jennifer, deep in conversation with some of Sophia's relatives. Aunt Patricia was at table 4 with family friends I'd known since childhood. The Hendersons, the Morettis, the Changs who used to host our New Year's Eve parties every year. These were people who'd watched me grow up, who had attended my high school graduation, who'd sent me birthday cards for 28 years. None of them had questioned why I wasn't at their tables. As the first course was served, I noticed something else. The meals being brought to table 12 were different from what the other guests were receiving. While everyone else got the herb-crusted salmon or beef tenderloin with roasted vegetables that I had seen on the wedding menu, we were served simple chicken breast with rice and steamed broccoli, clearly the vendor meals that Maria had mentioned. "Oh, this is ridiculous," Maria said when she saw our plates. "You're a paying guest, not staff. Let me get the manager." "Please don't," I said again, though my cheeks were burning with humiliation.
It's really okay. But it wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. I drove 2 hours to celebrate my brother's wedding. I'd spent 3 months coordinating with florists and saving every penny for the perfect gift. I hand-copied our grandmother's recipes because I knew they meant something to Marcus. And this was how my family had chosen to honor my presence at the most important day of his life.
I took a bite of the dry chicken and tried to focus on Maria's story about her daughter's first day of clinicals. I nodded and smiled at James's jokes about bridezillas and demanding mothers of the bride. I listened to Patricia's tales of wedding disasters she'd successfully averted. But part of me kept watching tables 1 through 11, wondering what I'd done to deserve this exile. Had I not contributed enough to the wedding planning? I'd offered to help with decorations, but Sophia had hired a professional coordinator. I'd suggested doing the flowers myself as my gift, but they'd already contracted with an upscale florist in Millbrook Heights. Every time I tried to be involved, I'd been gently but firmly redirected. Had I embarrassed them somehow? I'd been careful to dress appropriately, to RSVP promptly, to follow every piece of wedding etiquette I could find online. I'd even taken the day off work without pay because I couldn't afford to request vacation time. As the evening progressed, I watched my family laugh and toast and dance, never once looking toward the corner where I sat with the hired help. Not even when Marcus stood to give his speech, thanking everyone who'd made the day special. His eyes swept across the reception hall, acknowledging tables of guests, but his gaze somehow managed to skip right over table 12. It was as if I wasn't there at all. The servers were kind enough to include me in their quiet conversations between courses, but I could see the pity in their eyes. This was wrong, and everyone at the table knew it. Everyone in the room should have known it, but apparently my family had normalized my absence from their lives so completely that seating me with the staff seemed perfectly reasonable to them. As the main course was cleared and the cake-cutting ceremony began, I made a decision. I would stay until the end of the reception because this was my brother's wedding, and I loved him despite everything. But I would remember this night. I would remember exactly how it felt to be treated like hired help at my own family's celebration. I would remember, and I would never forget who showed me kindness when my own blood relatives couldn't be bothered to save me a seat at their table. The cake-cutting ceremony ended with cheers and camera flashes, and I watched from my corner table as Marcus and Sophia fed each other bites of the 3-tiered vanilla and raspberry creation that had cost more than my monthly car payment. The DJ announced the first dance, and the newlyweds glided onto the dance floor to At Last by Etta James, while guests formed a circle around them, phones raised to capture the moment. I stayed seated at table 12, applauding politely when everyone else did, but something inside me had shifted during dinner. The kindness of the catering staff had highlighted just how cruel my family's treatment really was. Maria had discreetly arranged for me to receive the same meal as the other guests for the remaining courses. Patricia had made sure I had fresh flowers from the bridal party's bouquets to brighten our table. And James had kept my water glass filled while cracking jokes that actually made me laugh despite everything. These strangers were treating me with more consideration than my own flesh and blood. As the father-daughter dance began, I watched our dad, Robert, beam with pride as he spun Sophia around the dance floor. She looked radiant in her designer gown, every inch the successful surgeon who belonged in this world of country club memberships and wine tastings in Napa Valley. When the song ended, the DJ announced all married couples to join them for the next dance. Our parents immediately took the floor. Aunt Patricia and Uncle Michael glided past my table without much as a glance in my direction. Cousin David twirled his wife Jennifer, both of them laughing at some private joke. I recognized Mrs. Henderson from our old neighborhood dancing with her husband of 40 years, the same couple who used to let Marcus and me swim in their pool every summer. Not one of them acknowledged my existence. But then, something happened that made my blood run cold. Mrs. Henderson broke away from her husband and walked directly toward my table. For a moment, my heart lifted.
Finally, someone was going to acknowledge this ridiculous seating arrangement. Someone was going to ask why I was sitting with the catering staff instead of at a family table where I belonged. "Excuse me," she said, but she wasn't looking at me. She was addressing Maria. "Could you please bring us some more champagne at table 4? We seem to have run out." Maria looked confused. "Oh, I'm not actually working the reception, ma'am. I'm just having dinner during my break, but I can find someone who—" "What do you mean you're not working?" Mrs. Henderson's voice carried a sharp edge. "You're sitting at the staff table."
The words hung in the air like a slap. Mrs. Henderson had just confirmed what I'd been trying to deny all evening. This wasn't some innocent mistake or oversight. Everyone knew table 12 was the staff table. Everyone knew I'd been deliberately seated here. And everyone known me since I was 8 years old thought it was perfectly appropriate. "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I'm Elena Blackwell, Marcus's sister. I think there might be some confusion." Mrs. Henderson's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and then something that looked almost like embarrassment, but not quite enough embarrassment to actually apologize. "Oh, Elena, I didn't— You look so different." She glanced around nervously as if suddenly realizing the implications of what she just said. How are you, dear?" "I'm fine, thank you. Just enjoying Marcus's beautiful wedding." "Yes, well, it's certainly lovely. Sophia's family really knows how to throw a party." She paused, clearly struggling with whether— Mrs. Henderson hurried away without another word, leaving an uncomfortable silence at our table. Maria reached over and squeezed my hand gently. "That was awful. I can't believe she just assumed I was serving staff because I'm sitting with you." But I was processing something much deeper than Mrs. Henderson's casual rudeness. She had known. The moment of recognition in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She had looked at the seating chart at some point tonight, seen my name at table 12, and hadn't questioned it for a second. None of them had questioned it. James excused himself to help with the dessert service, and Patricia was called away to handle some minor crisis with the sound system, leaving Maria and me alone at the table. The reception swirled around us. Laughter, clinking glasses, the shuffle of dancing feet, but we might as well have been invisible. "How long have you been estranged from your family?" Maria asked gently. "We're not estranged," I said automatically, then stopped. "Were we? I mean, we talk, we text sometimes. I sent Marcus a birthday card last month." Maria's expression was skeptical, but kind. "Honey, I've worked enough family events to know what dysfunction looks like. This isn't normal sibling rivalry or wedding stress. This is deliberate." I wanted to argue with her, to defend my family, to insist that there was some reasonable explanation for all of this. But sitting there in my carefully chosen dress at the staff table, watching my relatives dance and laugh without a single glance in my direction, I couldn't find the words. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, my heart jumped, thinking maybe Marcus had finally noticed where I was sitting and was reaching out to apologize or explain. But it was from my friend Casey back in Cedar Falls. "How's the fancy wedding? Getting lots of good family time?" I stared at the screen, trying to figure out how to respond. What was I supposed to say? That I was sitting with the catering staff because my own family couldn't be bothered to save me a real seat? That I'd been treated like hired help at my own wedding reception? That Mrs. Henderson, who used to give me homemade cookies every Christmas, had just mistaken me for waitstaff? Instead, I typed back, "It's beautiful. Marcus looks so happy." It wasn't a lie, exactly. Marcus did look happy. Blissfully, radiantly happy as he danced with his new wife and posed for pictures with friends from Stanford and colleagues from his tech company. He looked like a man who had everything he'd ever wanted, surrounded by people who understood his world of stock options and venture capital and weekend trips to Tahoe. Looking at him now, I tried to remember the last time we'd had a real conversation. Not the polite check-ins during holidays or the brief phone calls on birthdays, but an actual meaningful exchange about our lives, our dreams, our fears. I couldn't recall one. Somewhere along the way, we'd become strangers who happened to share DNA and childhood memories. The realization settled over me like a heavy blanket. This wasn't about wedding seating arrangements or family politics or even social class differences. This was about the fundamental truth that I no longer had a place in Marcus's life, and maybe I never really had. I'd been playing the role of devoted sister to someone who saw me as an obligation at best, an embarrassment at worst. As if summoned by my thoughts, our mother, Linda, approached our table. She was slightly flushed from dancing, her silver hair elegantly arranged, and her burgundy mother of the groom dress perfectly tailored. For a moment, I felt a surge of hope. Finally, someone was going to acknowledge the situation and fix it. "Elena, dear, are you having a nice time?" "Yes, Mom. It's a beautiful reception."
She glanced around the table, taking in the simple centerpiece, the basic chairs, the proximity to the kitchen doors. Good, good. Well, I just wanted to check on you, make sure you're comfortable. Comfortable. As if I were a distant acquaintance whose feelings they needed to consider but not actually address. As if sitting me with the hired help was simply a minor inconvenience rather than a devastating statement about my worth in their eyes. "I'm fine," I said, because what else was there to say? "Wonderful. Well, I should get back. Sophia's grandmother wants to meet everyone, and you know how these things are." She leaned down and gave me a quick, perfunctory kiss on the cheek. "We'll talk soon, okay?" And then she was gone, gliding back toward the family tables where she belonged, where everyone belonged except me. Maria had witnessed the entire exchange with growing incredulity. "That was your mother?" she asked when Linda was out of earshot. "Yes." "And she just left you here?" "She checked on me," I said weakly. "Elena," Maria's voice was firm but compassionate, "that wasn't checking on you. That was making sure you weren't going to cause a scene." The words hit me like a physical blow because I knew she was right. My mother hadn't come over to invite me to join the family tables or to apologize for the seating mistake. She'd come to manage the situation, to ensure that I would continue sitting quietly in my corner without disrupting the perfect wedding narrative they'd constructed. I excused myself and walked to the ladies' room, needing a moment to collect myself. In the ornate mirror above the marble sinks, I studied my reflection. I looked tired, older somehow than I had this morning. The navy dress that had made me feel beautiful earlier now seemed plain, cheap, inadequate for this glittering world of crystal and silk. When I returned to table 12, I found Patricia back in her seat, looking troubled. I just had the strangest conversation with the venue coordinator. I mentioned that you were Marcus's sister and how unusual it was for immediate family to be seated with vendors. She looked at me like I was crazy and said, "The family specifically requested that you be seated here." The room seemed to tilt around me. Specifically requested. This wasn't an oversight or mistake or even casual cruelty. This was premeditated humiliation. "Are you sure that's what she said?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Patricia nodded grimly. Word for word. She seemed surprised that I was questioning it, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Maria leaned forward, her expression fierce. "That's it. I am getting the manager. This is beyond inappropriate." "No," I said quickly, grabbing her arm. "Please don't. I can't make a scene at Marcus's wedding." But even as I said it, something was building inside me. Not anger yet, but something deeper and more dangerous. A cold, clear understanding that everything I thought I knew about my place in this family was a lie I'd been telling myself for years. The dancing continued around us, the celebration reaching its peak as the DJ played crowd favorites and guests loosened up with more wine and champagne. I watched my cousin David attempt some embarrassing moves from the 80s, while his wife laughed and our Aunt Patricia clapped along. The Hendersons were swaying together to a slow song, lost in their own world of 40 years of marriage and shared memories.
These people had known me my entire life. They'd attended my high school graduation, sent me birthday cards, included me in family gatherings for nearly 30 years. And yet, when presented with the seating chart that placed Robert and Linda Blackwell's daughter at the staff table, not one of them had questioned it. What did that say about how they viewed me? What did it say about who I really was in this family? My phone buzzed again. Another text from Casey. "Send pics. Want to see you all dressed up at the fancy venue." I looked around the reception hall, taking in the crystal chandeliers, the perfectly arranged flowers, the guests in their designer clothes laughing and dancing and celebrating. How could I possibly explain this? How could I send a photo of myself sitting at the staff table without revealing the complete humiliation of my situation? Instead, I angled my phone carefully and took a photo of just the floral centerpiece on a nearby family table, making sure not to include any people or table numbers. "Beautiful flowers," I texted back. It felt like lying, but it was easier than the truth.
As the evening wore on, I began to notice other things I'd missed earlier. During the cocktail hour, while I'd wandered alone among the rose bushes, there had been a family photo session. I'd seen the photographer gathering groups of relatives, but no one had called me over to join them. At the time, I'd assumed they were just doing immediate family shots, but now I realized they'd probably taken extended family photos, too. Photos that would hang in Marcus and Sophia's home for years to come, chronicling their perfect wedding day with their perfect families. Photos that wouldn't include me. The bouquet toss was announced, and all the single women were invited to gather on the dance floor. For a moment, I considered staying seated. The last thing I wanted was more attention drawn to my already humiliating situation. But Maria nudged me encouragingly. "Go on," she said with a smile. "Maybe you'll catch it." I joined the crowd of women, standing toward the back, trying to blend in. Sophia turned her back to us, holding the beautiful bouquet of white roses and baby's breath, the same flowers I'd helped coordinate months ago when Marcus had called me excited about his vision for the perfect wedding. She tossed the bouquet high into the air, and it arced over the eager crowd, past the reaching hands of Sophia's medical school friends and Marcus's female colleagues, past our younger cousins and family friends, and somehow, impossibly, it landed directly in my hands. The crowd cheered and applauded as tradition dictated, and the photographer snapped pictures of me holding the bouquet with a surprised smile. For a moment, I felt included, part of the celebration, like maybe this was a sign that things were about to change. But as I walked back toward table 12, bouquet in hand, I caught sight of my mother's face across the room. She was watching me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger exactly, but something colder, displeasure. As if my catching the bouquet was somehow inappropriate. As if even this small moment of inclusion was more than I deserved. The spell broke instantly. I wasn't part of this celebration. I was a problem to be managed, an embarrassment to be contained. The bouquet in my hands felt like evidence of my own delusion, proof that I was still desperately grasping for scraps of acceptance from people who had already decided I didn't belong. I made it back to my table just as the garter toss was announced. Marcus removed the garter from Sophia's leg with theatrical flair, while the crowd whooped and cheered. All the single men gathered on the dance floor, including James, who had rejoined us after helping serve the wedding cake. "Wish me luck," he said with a grin as he headed toward the crowd of bachelors. I watched my brother prepare to toss the garter, his face flushed with happiness and champagne. He looked so confident, so completely at home in this world of privilege and success. And why shouldn't he be? This was his night, his triumph, his perfect beginning with his perfect wife in their perfect life. The garter sailed through the air and landed in the hands of one of Sophia's colleagues, a young doctor who blushed furiously as the crowd cheered. According to tradition, he and I were supposed to dance together as the couple most likely to be married next. As we took the floor for the awkward traditional dance, I caught Marcus's eye across the room.
For just a moment, our gazes met, and I saw something flicker across his face. Recognition, maybe? Or perhaps just confusion about why his sister was dancing with a stranger while holding his wife's bouquet. But then Sophia whispered something in his ear, and he laughed and turned away, pulled back into his world of celebration and joy. The moment passed, and I was alone again, dancing with a kind stranger, while my family carried on without me just a few feet away. As the song ended and I returned to table 12, I realized something had fundamentally shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, but it was being overtaken by something else. Clarity. I finally understood exactly where I stood with my family, and more importantly, I understood that this wasn't really about me at all. This was about them, about their need to exclude, to diminish, to maintain their hierarchy by ensuring someone else occupied the bottom rung. Tonight, that someone was me, but tomorrow it would be someone else who didn't quite fit their image of success and belonging. The question was, what was I going to do about it? The reception was winding down when it happened. Guests were beginning to gather their belongings, saying their goodbyes, and taking final photos with the happy couple. I was sitting quietly at table 12, still holding Sophia's bouquet, and watching the slow exodus of family and friends who had spent the evening pretending I didn't exist. Maria had left to help with the final cleanup, and James was busy stacking chairs and clearing tables. Patricia was coordinating with the venue staff about the breakdown schedule. I was essentially alone, invisible in my corner, when I heard footsteps approaching. Elena?
I looked up to see a tall, elegant man in his 60s walking toward me. He had silver hair, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to being in charge. I didn't recognize him, but his expensive suit and the way other guests had deferred to him throughout the evening suggested he was someone important. "Yes?" I said, standing politely. "I'm Charles Riverside," he said, extending his hand. "I own this venue." My heart skipped a beat. The owner of Riverside Manor was approaching me personally? This couldn't be good. Had someone complained about my presence at the staff table? Was I about to be asked to leave? "Oh," I managed. "It's a beautiful venue, Mr. Riverside. You should be very proud." He smiled warmly. "Thank you. I am proud of what we've built here. But that's not why I wanted to speak with you." He paused, studying my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "I have to ask, are you Claire's daughter?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Claire. My mother's maiden name was Claire Riverside, but she'd always told us her family had cut ties with her when she married our father. According to the story we'd grown up with, her wealthy parents had disapproved of her choice to marry a middle-class electrician, and they'd essentially disowned her when she refused to break up with him. My mother's maiden name was Claire Riverside," I said carefully, "but I don't think we're related. She never mentioned any family." Charles's expression grew sad and knowing. "Oh, my dear girl, we are most definitely related. You're my granddaughter." The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence that had fallen around us. Even the busy sounds of reception cleanup faded into background noise as I stared at the stranger who claimed to be my grandfather. "That's impossible," I whispered. "My mother said her parents died when I was little. She said her family wanted nothing to do with us." "Your mother said a lot of things that weren't true," Charles said gently. "May I sit down?" I nodded numbly, and he took the chair beside me at the staff table. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, potentially meeting my grandfather for the first time, while sitting at the table where my own immediate family had deliberately exiled me. "Your mother, Claire, is my youngest daughter. When she married your father, we didn't cut her off. We welcomed Robert into the family. We helped them buy their first house, paid for Marcus's college expenses, even offered your father a management position at one of my companies. I felt the ground shifting beneath me. What are you talking about? Dad works for an electrical contractor. He's worked for the same small company for 20 years.
Because he chose to. He turned down my offer, said he wanted to make his own way in the world, which I respected. But we never stopped trying to be part of your lives. We sent birthday cards, Christmas gifts, graduation presents. We invited your family to every holiday gathering, every family celebration. My mind was reeling. I never received birthday cards from grandparents. Mom always said we didn't have any extended family. Charles pulled out his phone and scrolled through what appeared to be contacts. I have your address in Cedar Falls. I've been sending cards and gifts to your apartment for years. Same for Marcus, though he stopped responding when he started college. The implications hit me like an avalanche. All those years of thinking I was alone in the world, that I came from a small, isolated family with no connections or support system, all those birthdays and holidays when I'd wished I had grandparents like my friends did, all those times I'd felt adrift and rootless, believing I had nowhere to turn when life got difficult. "How long have you been trying to contact us?" I asked, my voice barely audible. 28 years, he said simply, "since the day you were born. Your grandmother, God rest her soul, never stopped hoping Claire would bring you to children to meet us. She died 3 years ago, still waiting." Tears started flowing down my cheeks before I could stop them. My grandmother had died waiting to meet me, while I was living 30 miles away, completely unaware she existed. All those cards and gifts that had never reached me, all those invitations to family gatherings I never received. "But how did you know I was here tonight?" I asked, managing to through my tears. Charles smiled sadly. "I received a wedding invitation for Marcus. It was the first communication I'd had from your family in years. I decided to attend, hoping to finally reconnect with my grandchildren. When I saw the seating chart earlier and noticed a woman named Elena Blackwell seated at the vendor table, I thought there might be a mistake. Then I saw you, and you look exactly like your grandmother did at your age." He paused, looking around the reception hall where my family was still celebrating, oblivious to the bomb that had just exploded at table 12.
The apartment was sparse but clean, filled with secondhand furniture and the kind of cheap necessities that spoke of someone rebuilding from nothing. But Miranda had agreed to meet with Camilla because she had been waiting 3 years for someone to finally believe her story. "Tell me about the pregnancy," Camilla said quietly. Miranda's face crumpled. "I was 6 months along when I discovered the first shell company. He had transferred our entire investment portfolio to something called Meridian Holdings, made it sound like a smart tax strategy. When I tried to access the account, I found out I had no signing authority. That's when I started digging deeper." She pulled out a worn folder filled with photocopied documents, bank statements, and legal papers. "I found 17 different companies, all with Dante as the sole owner, all containing assets that should have been ours jointly. Our house, our cars, even my grandmother's jewelry. Everything had been transferred to entities I couldn't touch." Camilla studied the documents, recognizing the same legal structures that Dante was using against her. "What happened when you confronted him?" "He said I was being paranoid, hormonal. He convinced me to see a therapist who specialized in pregnancy-related anxiety disorders. What I didn't know was that this therapist was his golf partner's wife, and she was documenting everything I said to build a case that I was mentally unstable. The manipulation was breathtaking in its sophistication." "The miscarriage?" Miranda wiped her eyes. "The stress was killing me. I wasn't sleeping, wasn't eating. When I finally tried to leave him, he had me committed for a 72-hour psychiatric hold, claiming I was a danger to myself and the baby. The trauma of being forcibly hospitalized while pregnant, I lost my son 3 days later." Camilla felt her own baby kick, as if responding to the horror of Miranda's story. "I'm so sorry." The worst part was that losing the baby actually made his legal case stronger. He claimed in court that my irrational behavior had caused the miscarriage and that I was too unstable to handle significant assets. The judge awarded him almost everything, and I was lucky to escape with enough money to start over. But Miranda hadn't just been hiding for 3 years, she had been planning. From a cardboard box under her bed, she pulled out hundreds of pages of additional research. Financial records, corporate filings, and most importantly, evidence of other victims.
Dante's done this before, Miranda said, spreading the papers across her small kitchen table. I've found traces of at least 3 other women over the past 15 years. The pattern is always the same. He targets successful women with significant assets, marries them, systematically drains their wealth, then discards them when they become problematic. The first case was Sarah Chen, a pharmaceutical heiress who had died in a skiing accident just 2 years into her marriage to Dante. The accident had occurred in Switzerland, far from any investigation by American authorities, and Dante had inherited her entire fortune as her sole beneficiary. The second was Priya Sharma, a tech entrepreneur who had been declared mentally incompetent after suffering what doctors called a psychotic break during her divorce proceedings. She was now in a private psychiatric facility, completely cut off from her former life and fortune. The third one is the most disturbing, Miranda continued, pulling out a newspaper clipping from the San Francisco Chronicle. Alessandra Romano, an Italian countess who married Dante 4 years ago. She disappeared during their honeymoon in the Mediterranean. Her body was never found, but she was declared dead after the required waiting period. Dante inherited her title, her properties in Tuscany, and access to her family's centuries-old wine empire. Camilla stared at the photograph of a beautiful woman with dark hair and intelligent eyes who looked remarkably similar to herself. You think he killed her? I think Dante is far more dangerous than either of us initially realized. These aren't just financial crimes. They're systematic destruction of human lives. And you're carrying his child, which makes you both more valuable and more vulnerable than the rest of us were. From another folder, Miranda produced documents that made Camilla's blood run cold. Corporate filings showing that Dante had been planning the Phoenix technology scheme for over 2 years, since before Camilla had even gotten pregnant. He had started moving assets and creating shell companies while he was still playing the loving husband, all while knowing that he would eventually need to eliminate her from the equation. But here's what he doesn't know, Miranda said, her voice taking on a harder edge. I've never stopped investigating. I've been building a case for 3 years, gathering evidence not just about what he did to me, but about all of his victims. And I've been waiting for someone with the resources and motivation to help me take him down.
But Charles was unmoved. He had 28 years of suppressed anger fueling his words, and he wasn't going to be silenced again. For nearly 3 decades, he announced to the room, my daughter Claire and her husband Robert have been intercepting birthday cards, Christmas gifts, and invitations to family gatherings meant for their children. They told Elena and Marcus that their grandparents were dead, while simultaneously telling me that their children wanted nothing to do with their wealthy relatives. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Gasps, whispered conversations, and shocked exclamations rippled through the crowd. I could see guests pulling out their phones, some undoubtedly texting others or even taking pictures of the unfolding drama. Mrs. Henderson stood up from table 4, her face flushed with anger. Claire Blackwell, is this true? Have you been lying to us for years about your family? Aunt Patricia was shaking her head in disbelief. Elena, honey, is this why you've always seemed so isolated? Why you never talk about extended family? The questions were coming from all directions now, and my parents looked like trapped animals. My mother's carefully applied makeup was starting to smudge as tears formed in her eyes, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of humiliation at being exposed. You don't understand, my father said, his voice rising defensively. We were trying to protect our children from what? Charles interrupted. From unconditional love? From birthday presents and Christmas mornings with their grandparents? From having a college fund and a safety net when life got difficult? Marcus finally found his voice from the head table. Grandpa Charles, he said, and the familiar way he said it confirmed what I'd already suspected. Maybe we should take this somewhere private. Grandpa Charles, not Mr. Riverside or Sir. Marcus had known all along. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been struggling to pay for community college, working 2 jobs just to make rent, believing I was completely alone in the world, my brother had been in contact with our wealthy grandfather. He'd known about the family money, the support system, the love that was being kept from me. No, Marcus, Charles said firmly. We've had enough private conversations. It's time your sister knew the truth about what's been done to her. He turned to address the room again, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to commanding boardrooms and making million-dollar decisions. Elena has been told her entire life that she has no extended family, no support system beyond her immediate relatives. Tonight, I watched those same relatives seat her at the staff table while telling me she works in service and would be more comfortable there. What they didn't mention is that Elena owns a successful floral design business, that she's been supporting herself since she was 18, and that she's one of the strongest, most resilient people I've never had the chance to know. My business wasn't exactly successful. I worked for someone else's flower shop, but I understood what he was doing. He was giving me dignity in front of people who had spent the evening treating me like I was worth less than the hired help. Furthermore, Charles continued, Elena's grandmother, my beloved wife Margaret, died 3 years ago, still hoping to meet the granddaughter who lived 30 miles away. She left a trust fund specifically for Elena's education and future, money that's been sitting untouched because we had no way to contact her directly. The room erupted again. Someone, I think it was one of Sophia's medical school friends, actually said, "Oh my God," out loud. The photographer, who had been discreetly documenting the reception, was now openly taking pictures of the confrontation. My mother finally broke. "Stop it!" she screamed, her composure completely shattered. "Just stop it! You never understood what it was like growing up in your shadow. Everything was about the Riverside name, the Riverside legacy, the Riverside expectations. I wanted my children to have normal lives." Normal lives? Charles' voice was ice cold now. You call lying to your children for 3 decades normal? You call intercepting your grandmother's love letters normal? You call seating your own daughter with the catering staff at her brother's wedding normal? The accusation hung in the air like a sword over my parents' heads. Around the room, I could see the faces of people who had known me my entire life, people who were finally understanding the scope of what had been done to me. And in that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about accountability, about truth, about the consequences of decades of deliberate cruelty disguised as protection. The reckoning had begun. The silence after my mother's outburst was broken by an unexpected voice. Sophia stood up from the head table, her wedding dress rustling as she moved. Her face was a mixture of confusion and growing horror as she looked between Marcus and I. "Wait," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Marcus, you knew about this? You knew Elena had a grandfather and you never told me?"
Marcus's face went from pale to gray. His new wife was staring at him with an expression I'd never seen before, disappointment bordering on disgust. Around them, the wedding party shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. "Sophia, it's complicated," Marcus started, but she held up her hand to stop him. "No, it's not complicated. Either you knew your sister had living grandparents while she struggled alone, or you didn't. Which is it?" The question hung in the air, and I realized that Sophia, brilliant, successful, principled Sophia, was seeing my brother clearly for the first time. The golden boy facade was cracking, revealing someone who had been complicit in decades of cruelty. "I knew," Marcus admitted quietly, his voice barely audible, "but I thought Mom and Dad had good reasons." "Good reasons for what?" Sophia's voice was rising now. "Good reasons to lie to your sister about her own family? Good reasons to let her think she was alone in the world while you had access to support and resources?" I found myself standing up from table 12, the movement drawing everyone's attention back to me. For the first time all evening, I felt like I had something to say, and more importantly, people who might actually listen. "There's more," I said, my voice stronger than I had expected. Charles nodded encouragingly, and I took a deep breath before continuing. "When I was 22, I got pneumonia and couldn't work for 3 weeks. I called home asking for help with my rent, just a small loan until I got back on my feet. Mom told me that financial responsibility was part of being an adult, and that I needed to figure it out myself. I looked directly at my parents as I spoke. I ended up sleeping in my car for 4 nights because I couldn't make rent.
But apparently there was a trust fund sitting there the whole time that could have helped me. Mrs. Henderson's sharp intake of breath was audible across the room. Elena, honey, why didn't you tell us you were struggling? Because I was raised to believe that asking for help was shameful. Because every time I tried to reach out to family, I was told I needed to be more independent, more self-sufficient. Aunt Patricia was shaking her head, tears in her eyes. We would have helped. Any of us would have helped if we'd known. But you did know, I said, and the room fell silent again. When I was 25 and my car broke down, I called Aunt Patricia asking if I could borrow $500 for repairs. You told me that Uncle Michael had just taken a pay cut and you couldn't spare the money. Patricia's face went white. Elena, that's not... we really were tight that month. Last Christmas, I continued, my voice gaining momentum, Cousin David posted pictures of his family ski trip to Aspen. The same week, I was working double shifts at the flower shop to afford Christmas presents for everyone. When I mentioned how tired I was at the family dinner, Mom made a comment about how some people just don't manage their time well. David looked stricken. Elena, I had no idea you were working so hard. Why didn't you say something? I did say something over and over again, but somewhere along the way, this family decided that my struggles were character flaws rather than circumstances that deserved compassion. I turned to look at Marcus, who was avoiding eye contact with everyone, especially his new wife. Elena, when you got your job at the tech company, I was so proud. I called to congratulate you, and I mentioned that I was thinking about going back to school for business classes. You said education was an investment, and I should make sure I could afford it before taking on debt. Marcus finally looked at me, and I could see shame written across his features. Elena, the whole time you knew there was money set aside specifically for my education. You knew our grandfather owned businesses and could have given me opportunities. You knew I had options, and you chose to let me believe I didn't. The pattern was becoming clear to everyone in the room now. This wasn't just about one-night seating arrangement or even about hidden family connections. This was about a systematic campaign to keep me small, struggling, and isolated while everyone else in the family enjoyed support, resources, and each other's help. Charles stepped forward, his voice firm. Elena, I want you to know that every Christmas and birthday for the past 10 years, I've increased the amount in your trust fund. Not just the principal, but additional gifts I would have given you if I'd been allowed to be part of your life. The money is substantial enough that you could quit your job tomorrow and pursue any education or business venture you wanted.
Sophia was staring at Marcus with undisguised horror. You knew about this? You knew your sister was struggling financially while there was money sitting there specifically for her? I thought, Marcus started, then stopped. I thought Mom and Dad were protecting her from getting spoiled or entitled. Spoiled? Sophia's voice cracked with disbelief. By having access to her own inheritance? By knowing her own family history? By being treated with basic human dignity? She turned to look at me, and I could see tears forming in her eyes. Elena, I am so sorry. If I had known any of this, I would never have allowed the seating arrangement. I would never have been part of this. For the first time all evening, I believed someone in my family was telling me the truth. Sophia's horror was genuine, her apology sincere. She was learning about her new husband's capacity for cruelty at the same time the rest of the room was. The trust fund is just the beginning, Charles continued, addressing the room but looking at me. Elena, your grandmother left you your jewelry, her art collection, and her personal letters. She wrote you birthday letters every year, hoping that someday you'd be able to read them. They're all waiting for you. I felt tears starting to flow again, but they were different this time. Not tears of humiliation or pain, but tears of grief for a relationship that had been stolen from me, and for a grandmother I'd never had the chance to love. How many letters? I asked, my voice breaking. 28, Charles said softly. One for every birthday you've had since you were born. The room was completely silent now, except for the sound of my quiet sobs and the soft clicking of the photographer's camera, still documenting everything. This wasn't just a family drama anymore. This was evidence of a profound injustice, a theft of love and connection that had shaped my entire life. And everyone in that room now understood exactly what had been taken from me. The photographer lowered his camera and stepped forward, his expression serious.
I expected him to ask us to move the drama away from his workspace, but instead he addressed Charles directly. "Sir, I've been documenting weddings for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Would you like me to stop taking pictures, or should I continue recording what's happening?" Charles looked at me, raising his eyebrows in question. For the first time all evening, someone was asking for my consent, treating me like I had agency in my own story. "Keep recording," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "I want there to be a record of this." My mother started to protest, but Sophia cut her off. "Actually, I'd like that too. This is my wedding, and I want documentation of how my new family really treats each other." The word family hung heavy with irony, and I could see Marcus flinch at his wife's tone. Sophia had positioned herself between me and my parents, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by anyone in the room. "Elena," she continued, "I know we don't know each other well, but I need you to understand something. What happened here tonight, this isn't okay with me. None of this is okay with me." She turned to face Marcus, her wedding dress trailing behind her like a white banner of moral authority. "And you," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, "we're going to have a very long conversation about the man I thought I was marrying." Before Marcus could respond, an unexpected voice joined the conversation. "Excuse me, but I think someone should speak up for what's right here." It was Maria, the server from table 12. She had finished her cleanup duties and was preparing to leave, but she had witnessed the entire confrontation. Now she stood at the edge of the crowd, still wearing her catering uniform, looking directly at my parents. "I've worked hundreds of events at this venue. I've served CEOs, politicians, celebrities. I've never once seen a family deliberately humiliate their own child the way you people did tonight." The room shifted uncomfortably. Here was someone from outside our social circle, someone who had no reason to get involved, calling out behavior that everyone else had been too polite or too shocked to address directly. "This young woman," Maria continued, gesturing toward me, "spent the entire evening trying to make excuses for you. She told me it was probably just a mistake when I offered to help fix the seating. She asked me not to make a scene when I wanted to get the manager. She protected your reputation even while you were actively destroying her dignity." Mrs. Henderson was nodding vigorously. "She's absolutely right. Elena, you've always been too kind, too forgiving. Even as a child, you were always making excuses for other people's bad behavior." Because I was taught that my feelings didn't matter. I was taught that keeping the peace was more important than standing up for myself.
James, the young server, stepped forward to join Maria. "Ma'am," he said to my mother, "I'm 22 years old, and even I know you don't treat family like this. My parents might not have a lot of money, but they would never let me think I was alone in the world." Patricia, the event coordinator, was still organizing her papers, but she looked up long enough to add, "In 30 years of event planning, I've learned that how people treat service staff says everything about their character, but I've never seen anyone treat their own family worse than they treat strangers." The alliance forming around me was unprecedented. People I just met were standing up for me with more conviction than my own family had ever shown. It was overwhelming and empowering at the same time. Charles stepped closer to me, his voice gentle but firm. "Elena, I want you to know that you have choices now, real choices. The trust fund your grandmother left isn't just money, it's freedom. You can go back to school, start your own business, travel, or just take time to figure out what you really want from life." "How much are we talking about?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. "As of last month's statement, approximately $470,000, Charles replied, "plus the accrued interest from the monthly deposits I've been making." The number hit the room like a physical force. Several people gasped audibly. David actually said Jesus Christ before catching himself. Even Sophia, who came from a wealthy family herself, looked stunned by the amount. $470,000? I repeated, trying to wrap my mind around it. All this time, while I was working 60-hour weeks and choosing between groceries and gas money, there was almost $500,000 sitting there? Your grandmother specifically requested that the money grow until you turned 30. She wanted you to have enough to truly change your life, not just pay a few bills. Your 30th birthday is next month. Next month. I would have discovered this truth in just a few weeks anyway, which made tonight's humiliation even more twisted. My parents had seated me with the catering staff, knowing that in 30 days, I would learn I was wealthier than most of the guests at their precious reception. Sophia was shaking her head in disbelief. "You people are sociopaths," she said to my parents. "How do you sleep at night knowing what you've done to your own daughter?" My father finally found his voice again. "You don't understand the full situation. Elena has always been difficult, emotional. We were trying to teach her independence." "Independence?" Maria's voice dripped with incredulity. "You taught her to expect crumbs while denying her access to a feast that was rightfully hers." "I've heard enough," Charles said firmly. He turned to address the entire room. "I want everyone here to understand something. Elena is my granddaughter, my heir, and a member of the Riverside family. What happened here tonight will never happen again because she will never again be in a position where she has to depend on people who've proven they can't be trusted with her well-being." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, handing it to me. "This is my attorney's information. I want you to call him Monday morning. There are legal documents you need to sign to access your inheritance, but more importantly, there are family assets and properties you should know about." "Properties?" I asked, weakly. "Your grandmother left you the lake house in Clearwater Falls, the one where she hoped to spend summers with her grandchildren. It's been maintained and furnished, waiting for you." I had a lake house. I had money, family history, legal representation, and apparently a grandfather who had been fighting for me for decades. In the span of one evening, my entire world had been turned upside down. Sophia approached me, taking my hands in hers. "Elena, I know this is overwhelming, but I want you to know something. After tonight, you'll always have a place in my life, regardless of what happens with Marcus. What I've seen here tells me everything I need to know about the kind of person you are." She glanced meaningfully at her new husband, who was still sitting at the head table, looking like his world was crumbling around him. "And unfortunately, it tells me everything I need to know about the kind of person he is, too." The alliances had been drawn. On one side stood my parents and Marcus, exposed and defensive. On the other side stood Charles, Sophia, the catering staff, and increasingly the wedding guests who were beginning to understand the scope of what they'd witnessed. For the first time in my life, I wasn't standing alone. What happened next would have been unthinkable just hours earlier. Sophia, still in her $15,000 wedding dress, pulled out her phone and began taking pictures of the seating chart that was still displayed near the entrance.
"I want evidence," she announced to the room. "I want documentation of how my new in-laws treat their daughter, because when people ask me why this marriage didn't work out, I want to be able to show them exactly who I married into." Marcus stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Sophia, you're being dramatic. This is between our family." "Our family?" Sophia's laugh was bitter. "Marcus, after tonight, I'm not sure I want to be part of this family, and I'm definitely not sure I want children with someone who could watch his sister be humiliated and say nothing." The mention of children hit Marcus like a physical blow. These were people who had planned their future together, who had just hours ago been exchanging vows about love and partnership. Now that future was crumbling in real time as Sophia discovered who she'd really married. Mrs. Henderson, who had been whispering urgently with her husband, suddenly stepped forward. "I have something I need to say," she announced, her voice trembling with what I now recognize as anger rather than age. "For years, I've watched Elena struggle," she began, addressing the entire room. "When she was 18 and needed a co-signer for her first apartment, she asked us because she said her parents couldn't help. We thought it was strange that Robert and Claire couldn't afford to help their daughter, but we did it anyway because Elena was such a sweet girl." My father's face was growing redder by the minute. "Helen, I'm not finished, Robert." Mrs. Henderson cut him off sharply. "When Elena's car died 3 years ago, she walked 6 miles to work every day for 2 weeks before she saved enough for a down payment on that old Honda. 6 miles. In the rain, because she said her family was going through financial difficulties and couldn't help." She turned to look directly at my parents, her 60-year friendship with them apparently meaning nothing in the face of what she'd learned tonight.
Aunt Patricia was staring at my mother in horror. Claire, last Christmas when you said you couldn't afford gifts for the kids, Linda and I pooled our money to buy presents so the children wouldn't go without. You let us believe you were financially struggling while Elena's trust fund was growing by thousands of dollars every month? And the GoFundMe, added David suddenly, his face pale with realization. Mom, when Elena got pneumonia and couldn't work, you shared that GoFundMe link in the family group chat. You asked all of us to donate to help Elena pay her medical bills and rent? I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. There was a GoFundMe? David nodded miserably. It raised about $2,000. Family, friends, people from your work. Everyone contributed because we all thought you have no other options. What happened to that money? Charles asked, his voice dangerously quiet. We gave it to Elena, my mother stammered. Eventually. Eventually? I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. Mom, I slept in my car for 4 nights. When did you give me $2,000? The silence stretched on until my father finally spoke, his voice barely audible. We paid your rent directly to the landlord. We thought it would be more responsible than giving you cash. After she had already been evicted and found a new place, David said flatly, putting the pieces together, you let your daughter sleep in her car while holding money that people had donated specifically to prevent exactly that situation. The photographer was capturing every moment, every revelation, every face in the crowd as they processed the scope of my parents' deception. This wasn't just about hiding family wealth anymore. This was about accepting charity under false pretenses, manipulating people's generosity and allowing their daughter to suffer when they had the means to help. Sophia was openly taking notes on her phone now. This is unbelievable, she muttered. You people committed fraud. You accepted donations from friends and family while hiding the fact that you had access to substantial resources. Charles stepped forward, his businessman's demeanor taking over. I think it's time to discuss legal implications, he said coolly. Elena, the money from that GoFundMe was intended for you during a medical crisis. If your parents collected it and used it for other purposes, that's potentially criminal. We didn't use it for other purposes, my mother protested. We paid your rent. 3 weeks after she had already been evicted, Mrs. Henderson pointed out sharply, after she had already suffered the consequences you were supposedly trying to prevent.
Maria, who had been listening to this entire exchange with growing amazement, shook her head. This is beyond anything I've ever seen. You people took money from a community trying to help your daughter while sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars that belonged to her. The event coordinator, Patricia, was furiously scribbling notes. I'm going to have to report this to my supervisor, she said. We've never had a situation where guests committed potential fraud in connection with an event we've hosted. Report what? My father demanded. Everything, Patricia replied firmly. The way you seated your daughter, the lies you told about her employment, the fact that you accepted charity under false pretenses. Riverside Manor has a reputation to protect, and we don't want to be associated with this kind of behavior. Charles pulled out his phone and began making a call. Yes, this is Charles Riverside. I need you to research GoFundMe campaigns for Elena Blackwell from approximately 3 years ago. Yes, that's right. I want to know who organized it, how much was raised, and where the money went. He hung up and looked directly at my parents. That was my attorney. We're going to get to the bottom of every lie you've told, every dollar you've stolen, and every opportunity you've denied my granddaughter. The mood in the room had shifted from shocked gossip to genuine outrage. These weren't just family secrets being aired anymore. This was potential criminal behavior being exposed in front of 200 witnesses, with a photographer documenting everything and a wealthy grandfather with legal resources promising to pursue justice. Sophia approached me again, her expression determined. Elena, I want you to know something. Whatever legal action comes out of this, you'll have my full support. I'll testify about what I witnessed here tonight. I'll provide character witness statements, whatever you need. She glanced back at Marcus, who was slumped in his chair at the head table, looking like his world had collapsed around him. And frankly, after learning what kind of family I've married into,
you might be the only member of it I want to maintain a relationship with. The alliance that had formed around me was becoming more powerful by the minute. It wasn't just about emotional support anymore. These people were offering to help me seek justice, to ensure that the truth was documented, and that there were consequences for what had been done to me. For the first time in my life, I had people willing to fight for me. People who saw injustice and refused to let it stand. People who understood that what had happened here tonight was not just mean or thoughtless, but genuinely wrong in ways that might require legal remedies. The truth was out, and it was spreading through the room like wildfire, creating alliances and divisions that would reshape every relationship my family had ever had. The next 24 hours would test everything I thought I knew about strength, forgiveness, and family loyalty. It started with the phone calls. At 6:47 a.m., the morning after the wedding, my phone rang. It was my mother, her voice shaky and desperate. "Elena, honey, we need to talk. There are things you don't understand about the situation with your grandfather. We were trying to protect you." I hung up on her without saying a word. The phone rang again, immediately. This time it was my father. "Elena, your mother is beside herself. We made mistakes, but we're still your family. We need to work this out privately, not air our dirty laundry in front of strangers." I hung up again. By 10 a.m., I'd received 17 calls from various family members. Aunt Patricia trying to mediate, Cousin David attempting to play devil's advocate for my parents, even distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly very interested in my well-being now that they knew about the trust fund. I answered none of them. Instead, I was sitting in Charles's attorney office, a sleek downtown law firm with floor-to-ceiling windows and the kind of understated elegance that only comes with serious money. Michael Chen, Esquire, was explaining the legal mechanisms that had kept me from my inheritance for nearly 27 years. "Your parents had no legal authority to intercept mail intended for you once you turned 18, he explained, sliding a thick folder across the mahogany conference table. "This constitutes mail fraud at the federal level. The GoFundMe situation adds potential wire fraud and theft by deception to the mix." I stared at the folder, which contained copies of birthday cards, Christmas letters, and legal documents that should have reached me years ago. "What are my options?" I stared. "Criminal charges, civil suits, or both," Michael said matter-of-factly. "Your grandfather has documented every attempt to contact you, every returned letter, every refused invitation. We have a paper trail that goes back decades." Charles, sitting beside me in the lawyer's office, reached over and squeezed my hand. "Elena, I want you to understand something. This isn't about revenge. This is about ensuring this never happens to anyone else in our family. And it's about getting you the justice you deserve." My phone buzzed with another call. Marcus this time. I declined it and looked back at Michael. "If I pursue legal action, what happens to them?"
Potentially significant fines, possible jail time for the federal charges, and civil damages that could include punitive awards, he replied. "But Elena, you don't have to decide today. The statute of limitations doesn't run out for several years on most of these charges." When I left the law office 3 hours later, I had bank information for the trust fund, keys to a lake house I'd inherited, and enough legal ammunition to destroy my parents' lives if I chose to use it. More importantly, I had something I'd never possessed before: choices. Real choices backed by real power. The boundary testing began that afternoon. My mother showed up at my apartment unannounced, crying and carrying a casserole. She knocked for 10 minutes before trying to use her emergency key, only to discover I'd changed the locks that morning. Through the window, I watched her stand on my doorstep, confusion and panic warring on her face, as she realized she no longer had access to my space. She'd been controlling my narrative for so long that the idea of me actually excluding her seemed incomprehensible. She left the casserole on my doormat with a note. "Elena, I love you.
We need to talk. You're breaking your father's heart. I threw the note away without reading it twice and donated the casserole to a homeless shelter. If she wanted to feed people who were struggling, she could do it honestly this time. The second test came that evening. Marcus arrived with Sophia, but they weren't together in the way I expected. Sophia stood slightly apart from him, her body language making it clear this wasn't a unified front. I opened the door, but didn't invite them in. "What do you want, Marcus?" "Elena, please. We need to figure this out as a family." Sophia thinks I should apologize, but I think you're overreacting to— "Stop," Sophia interrupted sharply. "Marcus, you promised you were going to take responsibility for your actions." He looked frustrated, like a child being forced to recite lines he didn't believe. "Fine. Elena, I'm sorry that you feel hurt by what happened at the wedding." "I'm sorry that I feel hurt?" I repeated slowly. "That's your apology?" "I'm sorry that things got out of hand," he corrected, still not taking actual responsibility. "But you have to understand, Mom and Dad were trying to protect you from getting spoiled or entitled. They thought if you knew about Grandpa's money, you'd become lazy and dependent." I looked at Sophia, whose expression had gone from disappointed to horrified. She was seeing in real time that her new husband was incapable of genuine accountability. "Marcus," I said calmly, "I've worked 2 jobs since I was 16. I put myself through community college while you got a free ride to Stanford. I've never asked this family for anything I didn't desperately need, and even then, I was told to figure it out myself. In what universe does any of that suggest I would become lazy or entitled?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Look, maybe they went too far with some things, but—" "There's no but, Marcus," Sophia interrupted. "Either you acknowledge that what your family did to Elena was wrong, or you don't. There's no middle ground here." "Sophia, you don't understand our family dynamics." "I understand them perfectly now, and I understand that I don't want to be part of a family that treats people this way." She turned to me with an expression of genuine remorse. "Elena, I'm filing for an annulment. I can't be married to someone who could watch his sister be humiliated and justify it. But more than that, I want you to know that you have an ally in me, regardless of what happens with Marcus." The conversation that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. For the first time in my life, someone was choosing me over Marcus. Someone was refusing to enable his behavior or make excuses for him. Someone was holding him accountable for his actions in real time. Marcus tried every manipulation tactic he'd learned over the years. He accused me of being vindictive, of tearing the family apart, of embarrassing him in front of his wife. When that didn't work, he tried guilt. He reminded me of childhood memories, of times he'd been kind to me, of how much our parents loved me despite their mistakes. None of it worked. "Marcus," I said finally, "I want you to leave. I want you to tell Mom and Dad that I'm not interested in reconciliation, mediation, or family therapy. I'm not interested in their explanations or their excuses. They made their choices for 28 years, and now I'm making mine. Elena, you can't just cut us off forever." "Watch me," I said, and closed the door. Through the window, I saw Sophia walk away from Marcus without looking back. He stood on my doorstep for another 5 minutes, probably expecting me to change my mind and let him back in to continue the conversation. I didn't. That night, I drafted an email to every family member that had called that day. It was short, clear, and left no room for misinterpretation. I am not interested in discussing, explaining, or justifying my decision to pursue legal action against my parents. I am not interested in family mediation or reconciliation at this time. Any future contact should go through my attorney, Michael Chen, whose information is included below. Please respect this boundary. I sent it to 17 people and then blocked all their phone numbers. For the first time in my adult life, my phone was quiet. No one was calling to ask for favors, to share family drama, or to make me feel guilty for not being more involved in family events. The silence was initially unsettling, but by the end of the week, it felt like peace. The boundaries were set, and I was prepared to enforce them. 6 months later, I was sitting on the deck of my grandmother's lake house in Clearwater Falls, watching the sunrise paint the water in shades of gold and amber. The house was everything Charles had promised and more. A 3-bedroom cottage with wraparound porches, a private dock, and gardens that had been lovingly maintained by a caretaker for years, waiting for me to come home. Home. That's what this place felt like in a way my family's house never had. The legal proceedings had moved faster than anyone expected. The federal mail fraud charges against my parents resulted in substantial fines and 2 years of probation. The civil suit was settled out of court for an amount that added significantly to my already substantial inheritance. More importantly, the investigation had uncovered additional accounts and assets that my grandmother had left specifically for me, including a small commercial property in downtown Cedar Falls that was generating rental income. I wasn't just financially secure. I was wealthy by any reasonable measure, with enough passive income to pursue whatever life I wanted without ever worrying about money again. But the real transformation wasn't financial. It was emotional. This morning, like every morning for the past 3 months, I started my day by reading one of my grandmother's birthday letters. I had been working through them chronologically, savoring each one like a conversation with a woman I'd never had the chance to know. Today's letter was from my 16th birthday, written in her careful script on cream-colored stationery. My dearest Elena, today you turned 16, and I wonder if you're learning to drive, going to school dances, falling in love for the first time. I wonder if you know how beautiful you are, how intelligent, how kind. I wonder if anyone is telling you these things, because every young woman deserves to know her worth. If no one else is saying it, please know that your grandmother thinks you are extraordinary. I wiped away tears and set the letter aside, adding it to the growing pile of correspondence that was slowly filling in the gaps of a childhood spent believing I was unwanted and alone. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. She'd kept her word about maintaining our relationship, and over the past months, she'd become one of my closest friends. The annulment had been finalized quickly, and she was thriving in her new life as a single woman. Coffee this afternoon? I have news about the foundation. The foundation? 6 weeks ago, Sophia and I had established the Margaret Riverside Foundation for Family Reconciliation, funded entirely by my inheritance. Its mission was to help families navigate estrangement, provide resources for young adults who'd been cut off from family support, and offer legal assistance to people whose families had committed financial abuse. We'd already helped 12 people access stolen inheritances, funded college scholarships for 6 students whose families had withdrawn educational support, and provided temporary housing for 3 young adults who'd been disowned for various reasons. The work felt like the most meaningful thing I'd ever done, and it was a way to honor my grandmother's memory while ensuring that what happened to me didn't happen to others. I texted Sophia back, "Absolutely. The usual place at 2? Perfect. Bring Charles if he's available. The legal team wants to discuss the next phase." Charles. My grandfather had become one of the most important people in my life, filling a role I hadn't even known was empty. We had dinner together twice a week, and he'd been teaching me about the family business, preparing me to eventually take over the Riverside companies when he retired. But more than that, he'd given me what I'd been missing my entire life, unconditional love and support. He celebrated my successes without jealousy, comforted me during difficult days without judgment, and treated me like I mattered simply because I existed. As I finished my coffee and prepared to drive into town, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. Not just the external circumstances, the money, the house, the meaningful work, but the internal landscape. I no longer spent my days walking on eggshells, trying to earn love that was never freely given. I no longer made myself smaller to accommodate other people's comfort. I no longer apologized for taking up space in the world. The flower shop where I used to work had offered me my old job back when word got out about my changed circumstances. I politely declined and instead provided them with a generous contribution to their employee benefits fund. Some bridges you cross, and some you burn, and some you simply choose not to rebuild.
My parents had made several attempts to contact me through mutual friends, through distant relatives, even through my old coworkers. Each message was variations on the same theme. They missed me, they were sorry for their mistakes, they wanted to reconcile and be a family again. I never responded. The truth was, I didn't miss them. I missed the family I thought I had, the loving parents I'd imagined existed beneath their criticism and withholding. But I'd never actually had that family. What I'd lost was an illusion, and you can't grieve forever for something that never existed. Marcus had tried a different approach. 3 months ago, he'd shown up at the foundation office with what he claimed was a sincere apology. He'd lost weight, looked haggard, and spoke about how losing Sophia had made him realize he needed to change. "Elena, I want to make things right between us," he'd said. "I want to be the brother you deserved all along." "Marcus," I'd replied calmly, "I already have the life I deserve. I worked for it, fought for it, and built it without help from people who proved they couldn't be trusted with my well-being. I don't need you to be anything to me anymore." He'd left looking confused and hurt, as if he couldn't understand why I wasn't grateful for his belated offer of basic human decency. As I drove toward town for my meeting with Sophia, I passed the Riverside Manor where Marcus's wedding had taken place. The venue still hosted events every weekend, though I doubted any of them had been quite as dramatic as that September evening when my life changed forever. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if they'd seated me at a family table that night. Would I have continued living in ignorance, working at the flower shop, believing I was alone in the world? Would my grandmother's letters have eventually found their way to me through some other channel? I'd never know, and it didn't matter. What mattered was that their cruelty had inadvertently led to my liberation. In trying to diminish me one final time, they'd created the conditions for my greatest triumph. At the coffee shop, Sophia was already waiting with Charles and a woman I didn't recognize, an attorney from our legal team who specialized in elder abuse cases. "Elena," Sophia said, standing to hug me, "meet Jennifer Walsh. She wants to discuss expanding the foundation's scope to include elderly people whose families are isolating them from other relatives." As we sat down to discuss the foundation's future, I realized I was exactly where I belonged, surrounded by people who valued justice, working to prevent others from experiencing the isolation and deception I'd endured, using my resources to make a real difference in the world. That night, I called Maria, the server who'd shown me more kindness at that wedding than my own family had. She'd become a friend over the months, and I'd helped fund her daughter's nursing school tuition. "How are you doing, honey?" she asked when she picked up the phone. "I'm perfect," I said, and for the first time in my life, I meant it completely. I was no longer Elena Blackwell, the forgotten daughter who sat with the catering staff. I was Elena Riverside, grandmother of Margaret, heir to a legacy of love and generosity, founder of an organization that turned pain into purpose. I was exactly who I was meant to be, and I'd never been happier to be wrong about what my life could become. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.